I was excited to actually do this. When they basically let us pick what we'd like to talk on. And I've kind of grown into, my life is basically, I grew up in kind of a Christian home, but I remember late elementary school wanting to figure out how to see my friends know God. And I don't know why that was there. I didn't think it had anything to do with my life. Went off to college. I had a terrible fear of public speaking, which almost kept me out of going to college. I thought I'm going to have to give a book report someday, and I didn't want to do that. And ended up feeling a call to ministry very deeply in 8th grade. Went into college, got a religion psychology degree. I thought the only way I could serve God without talking would be to be like a Christian counselor or something like that. And then I went back to Portland, Oregon, went into seminary, and I got kicked out of the counseling program. And I'll tell you that story maybe later, maybe the second session. But that forced me into trying to figure out how do I serve God. And a friend said, "Why don't you try something like Youth for Christ?" They said, "I think you're an evangelist." And that was the first time I'd ever had somebody sort of say that. But when he said that, I remember thinking, that's all I ever think about. I go into a restaurant, a pub, a coffee shop. All I think about is people that don't know Christ. And so when they said you could basically talk on whatever you want to talk about, I'm glad that you came, because my guess is that you're people that maybe think like I do. You really care about lost people. It's not so much, maybe you're not, most of you are pretty young. So my guess is all this church talk, you're kind of like, okay, whatever, dude. But you really care about your friends. So I'm going to unpack the Adullam story that's told in the Tangible Kingdom a little bit. And you'll kind of get to watch what happened to us a little bit. A little background on me. How many of you have actually read the Tangible Kingdom? Okay, so we're going to do a little framing for you, since many of you haven't heard our story. But that book came out a couple of years ago. And that was essentially a story of what happened to us when we showed up in Denver as missionaries, not wanting to plant a church. I didn't really at the time even want to be a spiritual leader ever again in my life. Okay, so if some of you have read that story, you could tell when I showed up in Denver, I am dead man walking from a previous church experience. And so this thing started to bubble up. Right now, what we do now is I help co-direct a ministry called Missional, which essentially is an apprenticing network for the missional movement. We just try to serve the missional movement any way we can. Most people that know us through what's called an MCAP, Missional Community Apprenticeship Practicum, where we essentially teach people how to do missional incarnational community. Most of that was related to church planters the last 5 years. The last 2 or 3 years has been mostly normal Christians, existing church, trying to figure out how to do this. And so that's essentially what we do. But let me unpack the story. And I do want you to know a little bit of my heart behind that, because there was a part of me growing up, especially when Youth for Christ ministry, anybody done a parachurch ministry? Back in the day, they would tell you, go lead people to Christ and then plug them into the local church. And at the time, I tried that. I thought that makes sense. We'll work with the local church. And we saw hundreds of people come to faith. And I was never able to successfully integrate even one person into the local church. And I started to question whether or not the idea of church could actually help me reach my friends. So that's sort of my personal pain that was always there. I would read church books, and it didn't seem to line up with what I was running into with people that were just out in my city. So I grew up in Portland, Oregon. Anybody from kind of the Northwest? Down here, I've been doing a little bit of Texas time. And down here, I've talked to people, and they say there's quite a few, sort of Christian-oriented people. In Portland, when we planted our first church there, it was less than 1% of those under the age of 35 that were in a church. It was it was weird when you would meet somebody that was a Christian. And so that was my background. I went to a church plant training that taught me that if I do church really well, people will want to come to my church. And we tried that. And people didn't seem to be interested in coming to our church. We had Grammy Award-winning singers on our worship team. We would do concerts in the park, and there'd be 4,000 or 5,000 people. We'd hand out flyers to our church, and guess how many people would show up to our church? Zippo. Okay, so that's Portland, just not interested in any of this thing, and yet this deep desire to see people come to faith. And so when we showed up in Denver, Is Matt in here? Yeah, Matt's my partner. We flew into Denver together, and we were really not intending to start a church. And Adullam bubbled up, and so I want to tell you how that story emerged, and we're going to think a little bit like missionaries this morning. But here's one of the things that I wanted to just mention. Alan mentioned that all of yesterday was putting Jesus at the center, which was critical. Do you guys know what Jesus put at the center? Sort of, yeah. Got around there later, but what was Jesus' central?
Kingdom people.
Yeah, it was the kingdom, right? So our job is to put Jesus at the center. Jesus put the idea of the kingdom. So he walked into this sort of melees of kind of spiritual confusion. Both Greek and Jew had some idea of concept of God or logos. There's a being out there. There's the law, but people were not really digging it. There's a lot of segregation. And Jesus walks into that environment and he starts sharing kind of a new thing, like literally a new world order, and people got interested in that. Now, growing up as an evangelist, as a Youth for Christ worker, nobody ever taught me about the kingdom. I don't remember one sermon where we were taught about the kingdom. I remember hearing the word, but kingdom was that place you go, you try to get people to after they die, right? Nobody ever told me anything about down here. And so my experience leaving Portland, having my heart pretty much ripped out regarding church, and if you've read the book, I'm in New York City about 4 months after I've left Portland. And I'm in an Irish pub after we were training some church planters, and I meet a woman named Fiona, who's my waitress. And she looked like she was maybe 28 to 35, somewhere in there. And she was from Ireland, obviously. If you go to New York and you go to an Irish pub, you're going to actually meet Irish people. In Denver, they could be Korean or white, whatever it is. But and Fiona started to tell me about her upbringing in Northern Ireland and her two friends that were killed in Protestant Catholic fighting. Do you guys catch a U.S. News World Report that came out about 9 months ago that said that during the 1970s and 1980s, about a third of all the kids that went through the Catholic school system were sexually abused? It was prolific, and it's Catholic, okay? So it was, in their mind, going up, this is a religious deal, a third of the kids sexually abused. That was Fiona's generation. And Fiona started to kind of share her heart a little bit. She asked us why we were there. And I said, we're sort of here to train leaders. And she asked, what type of leaders? I said, church leaders. And she said, well, what do you teach them? And I said, we kind of teach them how to do church. And she said, well, why would you do that? Why would you want more churches? And then she started to unpack her story. And so she asked me, when she asked why are you doing that, at the time I was pretty spiritually dead. I was kind of jaded. So I didn't want to, that was the first time in my life I wanted to turn off my little evangelistic switch. I didn't want to talk to her about Bible verses. I didn't want to talk to her about church, obviously. What else do you talk about? So I started to make up some stuff that I had read in Scripture. I started to talk about, I remember the first time I was really ever using the words the kingdom in my own lingo type of thing. I said, Fiona, what you experience, this is sort of what I remember saying. Fiona, what you're frustrated with isn't what it was supposed to be. And Jesus, that's not what he came about. And I said, he kind of came and he mentioned this thing called the kingdom. And I said, as far as I can tell, it's this alternative way of life that's available to every person because of somebody that died for all the evil, all that stuff you hate. Somebody died, Jesus, and he makes it available for you to live an alternative way of life. It's like the globe spins clockwise, and because of what Jesus did, he allows you to live and spin the other way. It's a completely different way. It affects everything in your life, and he kind of taught about it in the kingdom. And what was weird, as I'm saying this, I'm actually thinking, that sounds pretty dang good. And it doesn't sound real churchy, and it's different than anything I've ever heard anybody tell me. And Fiona looked really interested. And she would say things like, tell me more about that. And so I kept making up some more, well, the kingdom's kind of like, it's like a little mustard seed. And it's kind of like this big dragnet, and so next couple nights go by, and I would come in, and I would always sit in Fiona's section, and every time she would come over and wait on us, and she'd go, "Oh, give me what else about the kingdom thing," and I keep making up stuff in the Bible, and then the last night, all of our staff flew home, and it was probably 11 o'clock at night. The Yankees were in the playoffs. I decided I'm going to go back before I fly back the next morning. I want to say goodbye to Fiona. And I'm starting at this point to kind of loving Fiona. You ever feel like that? You meet people, a little Starbucks time, and you get in your car and you start to get a little shaky, There's something about how you've connected. Anybody? It affects you at the heart level. I'm starting to love Fiona. And I walk into the pub, it's packed, and I hear over the massive crowd of people, I hear Fiona's voice say, "That's the guy. That's the dude I was telling you about. You got to hear how he talks about God." Bar splits. I kind of Clint Eastwood my way through. No, I walked in. It got pretty quiet, and then everybody got back to being Irish, and but she gathered some of her friends around, and she goes, tell them that stuff about the kingdom." So I just kind of made up some more stuff about the kingdom, and they all really liked the kingdom stuff, and so they let me close down the bar, and I cleaned out the sink with them, and left, and as soon as I opened up the door, I sort of refound God, sort of refound Christianity. And kind of this thought of maybe this whole thing I've been doing is not bad, but maybe I don't really know. Maybe I'm not on about what Jesus was on about. Maybe people really do want to find God. Maybe they would love to hear about the kingdom. And so that was our journey. So we showed up in Denver, not to do church. We didn't really know. I called my wife. We had just moved to Eugene, Oregon, 2 hours south of Portland. Took my family out of our hometown. We're literally 4 months into a new city with my kids and the dogs, the whole thing. And I call Cheryl as I'm getting on the plane. By the way, that was 2 weeks after 9/11. So it was a very serious time. I called her and I said, "Look, we got to move again." And she was cool about it. I said, "Hey, pick a city." And she picked Denver because she was in love with John Elway at the time. And we moved to Denver to try to figure out the kingdom. And we decided to go. We went on staff with the missions agency. I started to raise missionary support, and we were just going to try to kingdom people. No intention of a church. I still not sure I like church at that point of the game, okay? And so I'm going to kind of walk you through what happened at that point. But I just wanted you that's why we call this kingdom and the conversion, is that what we're trying to communicate is we don't think people are interested in finding church. We don't think people are interested in finding much of anything, but we think they're pretty darn open to finding out about an entirely different way of living made available to them through Jesus Christ. Okay? Church, hopefully, then, is what happened to us. Church just happened. Church should be a place where when people are actually living the kingdom and people being drawn to the kingdom, then the church should just naturally grow. It makes sense, doesn't it? So we didn't start with sort of church. We just started with a little band of people. And what I'm going to do is I want to walk you through why we're maybe not seeing conversion. So in the story, I think you're probably picking up why I think we're not seeing a lot of conversion. And then I'm going to walk you through basically how missionaries would begin to create an environment where the kingdom can start to show up. And then essentially how you begin to structure incarnational community, which is what I think is the best environment for the kingdom to actually be shown to people. Does that make sense? So let me give you just a quick sort of why we're in the predicament we're in. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but you've heard quite a bit of stuff about where we're at right now, why things have to be different. About 60 years ago, that was a percentage of people in the United States that were in a church. That included Catholic, Protestant, people that would show up in a building and do kind of, God stuff. At the present rate of people leaving the organized church, we're thinking right around the year 2020, this will now be the population of people that are in church. Okay, we're losing about 2% of the church people every year. So even though you see churches that are doing very well, and whatever, we know a good majority of that growth into the high mid-90s is transfer growth from other churches. Okay, so and those that lead those churches know that, and there's nothing wrong with transfer growth. People are losing their heart in church, and so when good church pops up that's responsible and preaches a good message and has a relevant way of living, people are going to go. So that's good, okay? But we have to recognize that form of church that essentially reaches those people is what we call that attractional church. So it's focused on doing church. Church is going to deliver the gospel, okay? And we're going to deliver the gospel primarily through what means? Okay, pulpit. So we've been a pulpit-based sort of, the idea being if we can get people attracted to our church, they'll come in and we'll preach the word. They will respond to the word. We will offer an invitation at the end of the service for them to pray and receive Christ. And how many of you that actually worked for you? There's still a lot of us. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that idea, okay? But here's a concept that Alan brought out in one of his books that I think is really critical. It's an idea called cultural distance. This idea is it's a missionary concept. And I want you to kind of start thinking like a missionary now. Missionary cultural distance means that if you go into any cultural setting, there are barriers between people in how they think and how they perceive things, barriers to them understanding and wanting to move towards the gospel. So if, let's say we all go plant a church in Iraq, throw out what you think some of the barriers are to the gospel. What's that? Yeah, so we got some deep religious issues. What else? Yeah, they hate us, okay? We're infidels, okay? That's going to be a bit of a barrier. What else? Yeah, we got language barrier.
War.
Yeah, we got war. So you would, as a missionary team, if you don't think like pastors or Christians, if you just think like a missionary, you go, look, we got like an M5 situation in Iraq, okay? And so we would recognize that we're going to have to approach the culture a lot differently than what we've been doing. And this has to play here because this type of church, that attractional, just good-hearted, Bible-teaching church, that fit the culture about 60 years ago. And that's why it worked for so many of us. So if you were trying to find God, you knew you find God, you go to the church. And the church was fairly relevant to the culture because we shared the same values, and so everything worked out pretty good, and so it worked. All we're saying now is that we are now, obviously, in a missionary context, right? And so that form of church is what we would call it's going to effectively reach what we would call M0. It's going to reach people that are essentially sort of de-churched, but they still have kind of a God story in their life, and they're looking, they just had kids, so they want their kids to get a little moral training, and we'd like some help with our marriage. That's M0, okay? Again, nothing wrong with providing a place for those people, but that church, all this work that we're doing, all the money, all the staff time is primarily geared still towards creating an environment where people come and hear the word and will respond. And you can see the immediate breakdown of that is what? They're not going to be in the building. So you can be preaching well, and yeah, if something happens and you're able to invite a friend and they get in the minivan with you and go, yeah, great things can happen. The word is always powerful to people. But this problem is that this structure of church is broken at the very beginning because people are not going to be in the building. It's an M0 situation. Okay? So here's what we want to suggest to you, is that you have to provide a different environment where the kingdom can be shown. This type of environment, it can deliver concepts about the kingdom. You could preach a sermon series on the kingdom. But do any of you really understand the kingdom? No. Do you think I do? No, the kingdom is this massive mystery of the gospel. Like all of life has changed. And so you can communicate doctrine. So if, old days, we'd say, look, if we're going to go be missional, this is the big talk this week, we're going to go be missional. If you're thinking missional from that structure, you're primarily thinking we're going to go out and we're going to communicate what? We're going to communicate the gospel, right? But what is that? It's a system of doctrines or beliefs that we try to get somebody to cognitively buy into. Well, you can see in my story with Fiona, is she going to buy some cognitive ideas about what she's always heard, the same old story? She's absolutely not going to touch that because it's not good news. Just want to throw some of this out to you. I think even though the heart of this is good, I think when we try to sort of communicate gospel concepts without it being embodied in a relational lifestyle with people, I think it actually comes across as bad news. And so I'd say this structure of church potentially does not actually deliver the gospel anymore. It can deliver parts and pieces of the gospel, but it can't drop the whole enchilada on people. And people they're not into this sort of what we call a reduced calorie idea. They don't want just a little package thing that you just give them and then you sign them up for some afterlife thing. They are looking for something a little bit bigger than that. And you know from reading your scriptures, your story is a huge story, right? When people saw this gospel, these kingdom communities being lived out, it blew their freaking minds. Can you believe what those people, I mean, it was not, in fact, interestingly, people's early conversions, they weren't converting to doctrine. Think about that. They were being converted to what? They were being converted to Jesus, right? They were being drawn to his person. Then after he left, empowered his body, we start to now see some doctrine kind of start to be formed, right, about the gospel. Their only message wasn't doctrine. They were being converted to a message. Jesus is alive, right? And then later, doctrine starts to build. But still, you see those early evangelistic stories in Acts, that's not a doctrinally focused, that's not a 4 spiritual laws conversion thing. You're being converted to his people now, right? Okay, so I want to suggest to you that we start to look at a different environment for the community, but let's go back to a missionary idea first, okay? Just want to keep us thinking like missionaries. It's what we call missionary flow, okay? You might, for the sake of this conversation, call it conversion flow. This is a little bit now of unpacking our story. Okay, so if we now, as a missionary community, show up in Denver, because we know most of the culture in Denver is now unchurched. Denver is, technically it feels like in some ways kind of northern suburb of Bible Belt. There's a lot of Midwest. First time I ever met people from Texas was when we moved to Denver. Never met, like, you guys are weird. Like, you actually love God. It's like I'm not used to that. But if you go anywhere in the world then, so we go to Iraq, we go to Amsterdam, we go to London, we go anywhere where you know that they are sick and tired of Christendom church. Where do you start as a missionary team? Imagine you're just with your friends, you're at the coffee shop, and you just showed up. What are you going to start talking about? Okay, now let's imagine we really do we just love lost people. Okay, and we hope someday a church forms. But what are we going to talk about? Like, let's say you're all moved in, you've got your apartment, and you've got 10 friends. What's the conversation about? Don't be afraid. We will. Say that again? And we're going to start talking about their families. What else are we going to talk about? If I pose, let's say I'm the team leader and I pose the question, okay, we're here. What are we going to start doing tomorrow? What do we start talking about?
Building relationships, making friends.
Okay, building relationships, making friends.
Where the people are at.
Yeah, where the people are at. Okay, you did it. Okay, you thought like a missionary. Here's what we start. We start with just how are we going to engage the culture, okay? So when Matt and I and our wives moved into Denver, we actually talked about how are we going to become friends with 50 people, okay? We defined friends, though, not as people that we would just know their names. We said they're not friends until they invite us to be with their friends, okay? It's a qualitative measurement to what we were going to do. We're going to make friends. When missionaries go overseas, they always go through classes or trainings about context, okay? You got to know your world, okay? If you don't know your world, you can't effectively understand the barriers and just get the gospel across, okay? So if you try to spread the gospel outside of the right context, you actually take the good news and it becomes bad news, right? Okay, so, and the reason why friendship is so important, it's not rocket science, is that friendship gives you the context of somebody. In America, to get context, what do? If you're planting a church, what are you always told to do? Yeah, go get a demographic, which tells you macro context. There's this many people that are between 30 and 50. There's this medium income. But interestingly, that is not really the context. Why does Jesus talk differently to every person that he hangs out with? Every person is their own context. So if I just walked in as an evangelist in that bar in Queens and tried to share the same message I had shared in Portland with Fiona, because I got a heart for Fiona, so I want to get the gospel to her, guess what I've just missed? I missed her completely. So until I know that 2 of her friends have died in Belfast, until I hear about sexual abuse, prolific sexual abuse in their generation, I don't start to... Is there more to Fiona than just those 2 things? Absolutely. There's massive things. And right now, the reason why you're struggling to see your friends come to Christ is, you know, even if you got the 4 thoughts about God across to them, you intuitively know that doesn't get it done, right? Because you know there's what's been building up all those years. Come on, you got to go into their minds. What are they really thinking about evangelical Christianity? You keep saying it because you know it. Go ahead. Hate. Pat Robertson. People are under rubble in Haiti. And Pat calls the demon card on him. Well, you know, they did make a pact with the devil. That goes all over. It's on late night comedy. Guys making fun of us. Now, I started to judge Pat. It's like I wanted to go outside and just scream my head off or go find the guy until I realized I had done that my whole life too. We have a natural tendency to just judge, okay? If I do that to Fiona, it's gone. You know that there's stuff that has built up, they've seen in the pop culture, that has affected the way that they see this whole story, and they're not interested in our church stuff. It's not what they're into. And so you've got to get the context. The only way you get that context is to actually become a friend. So one of Jesus' titles from the culture was what? He was a friend of sinners. And so he sort of had one up on us. He was God, so it says he knew the hearts of every person. Okay, so he could meet with the woman at the well. He could meet with the woman caught in adultery. He kind of knew. He had a little extra something, had some mojo that we don't have, okay? But he still empowers us to stop and be listeners, become friends, hear the story. So Matt and I, over that year, we just started to make friends with people. My wife and I committed to opening up our house at least 3 nights a week for people. And, we're a normal family. My girls play ice hockey. It's like your typical soccer family. They travel all over the world. My oldest son, Ryan, has severe epilepsy and just has seizures all the time. It's the big guys, the stuff that disrupts the day. So we don't have extra time. We're tired. We didn't have any money. When we moved to Denver, I was house painting. Matt was selling like FedEx stuff. Our first church plant in Portland, I was essentially a full-time house painter with my son and his special needs. Our church plant emerged. There's some ability to do this stuff, but you've got to make some intentionality. So Cheryl and I, we said we'll have our house open. We'll just make friends, okay? How many of you have friends right now with people that are outside the church? In the way that I describe it, qualitatively, they love you enough, they trust you enough to invite you to hang out with their friends. Okay, so we're getting there. That's what we're working at. It's lots of barbecues, By the way, intuitively, let's go back to this. How long do you think in any culture it's going to take to become that type of a friend with those people? I've asked this question in South Africa, to East Western Europe, to Montana, anywhere. Almost everybody intuitively now realizes it takes about 2 years to just know somebody and to get what we would call street cred. Okay? Now, back in Youth for Christ days, they would teach you to get street cred in like a week or two. Go do something nice. Bake them cookies so you can share the gospel the next week. Your missionary context that you now live in, that's too fast. You can't. Okay, there's too many barriers for you just to hop to that. You've got to settle into missionary life. What was great this morning was them saying if we just all over the course of our lives, 3 people. How do you feel when that came across? Doesn't that just kind of, it just calms you down. When we train our own communities in Adullam, we actually say this would be we'd love to see this. We'd love to see over the course of a year or two, you have one other couple come into your group or one other single person. When I say that, you can hear, okay? Because the conversion thing used to always be what? If I say to you right now, I'm your pastor, I say, look, we're going to go be missional. So in fact, we're going to cancel church. We're going to all go out and be missional right now. What do you all feel emotionally? You're like, oh, crap, dude, crap. Okay? This doesn't feel right? Okay, so this is part of engaging culture, incarnation. We're going to talk about this a little bit tomorrow in the main session, but the missional is how you go. It's the sending push to the church, right? But incarnational is really what we're talking about now. It's the qualitative way that we go. And it's the ability to just 30 years without saying anything. Jesus, our model. Okay? And so you're going to have to get over this idea that people go to hell if you don't get to them in time. Okay? You teach that in Texas. They're gonna burn in hell unless you get to them. What happens if they get in the car wreck today? It's a worthy question. If you love people, you will ask that question in your heart. But you have to remember, you're trying to model the life of Jesus, who somehow holds the whole world in his hands. Okay. And if you get out of position, if you do not settle into the incarnational way, you will not listen to people, you will not understand the context, you will not be able to therefore communicate the gospel of the kingdom. Now let's go and I can see some passion coming out. By the way, you can interrupt any time and you can start a fight, whatever, okay? Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, no fight. I just wondered if you're a missionary with a specific assigned mission and you're meeting people, how do you, when they say, what do you do for a living? Because I'm beginning to feel like the word, I work for Campus Crusade for Christ, or I'm a missionary, I work with the military guys and stuff, immediately throws up a wall.
Yeah, you make up anything you possibly can. I will still, because occasionally, about once a year, I still paint a house. I'm still a house painter sometimes. And if you can't think of a other vocational idea, think of a hobby. If you're into music, I'm into arts initiatives here in the city. Just whatever, make it up, okay? But try to avoid that, okay? What else? Any other questions? We'll keep moving, but yeah.
Will you just define the word incarnational?
Yeah, incarnational is making the concept real. So incarnation comes out of John 14:16, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So word, proclamation, if it would have just stayed in heaven, according to that scripture, we would not have been able to perceive God's glory. So he comes and he takes on flesh, and we're able to now perceive him. So it's everything related to our posture. So it's not just the proclamation, it's really the embodied life of that proclamation. Does that make sense? And that's why, Alan's always talking missional, incarnational, because if you're just missional without incarnational, you're a bad freaking dream to your friends. Because you're going at them, okay? Incarnational is like Jesus, you walk amongst them. Yeah.
In our context, it seems like we have a lot of folks that want to hang out with people, but just like on occasion.
Yeah.
What would you say in terms of...
How do you hear on occasion in the story so far?
Nope.
This is not on occasion. This is you jump into the culture and they become your friends. Okay? It has to be, and I'll tell people, this is not necessarily adding anything to your life. We're all busy, right? Your friends are busy that you're trying to see come to faith. Okay, they don't got extra time either. So you don't need extra time to be incarnational. It means to be with them. Adullam has emerged as a church from the three places we were. From the hockey stadium, where our kids played hockey, just sitting on the bleachers. From our street, Cheryl and I put out 2 rocking chairs on our front porch right when we moved in. We're from kind of inner city Portland, where urban type of architecture, they build a front porch on a house, and people sit out on the front porch, right? That was how that used to work. Suburban architecture during the 70s and 80s, the me generations, 90s, what did we do with the front porch? We tore it off, gave you a long driveway, we put it in the back, and then we gave you a fence that was how tall? Look, this was all planned because they planned communities based on what the culture is wanting at the time. So they built you a 6-foot cedar fence. 6 foot because they know that's the height. You can see the top of the dude's hair when he's mowing. But you don't have to make what type of contact with him? You don't have to make eye contact. So now look at how the architecture is changing, even in the suburbs now. What are they building? We live in a suburb of Denver. We have a 3-foot fence with chicken wire. Because they know intuitively people are now wanting a little bit more community. They're actually building your front porches back on. So Cheryl and I put out 2 white rocking chairs in our front porch. We'd have coffee every day at 8 o'clock, and we'd have every coffee at 4 o'clock. So 2 coffee times. One was for us in the morning. We kicked the kids out. 4 o'clock was for everybody else. So we'd sit in our rocking chairs. We'd have coffee, and I met Steve and Jen, who are in the book. You remember the story where the dog pees on me? Okay. That's just Steve and Jen's story. That's why most of you will now finally go buy the book, okay? But Steve, I noticed that Steve, every day at 4 o'clock, Steve would come home from work, let out his black labs, and he would start throwing the ball to him. And we had 2 black labs of our own. So we'd sit outside, do coffee. The dogs actually got to where they're waiting every day. They're like evangelistic dogs. So we had Steve come out, dog's garage door comes up. Steve would actually, I could see him looking for me to get my dogs out. And one day, we're just throwing the balls to the dogs, and Jen, his wife, comes up to me and she goes, okay, now this is somewhere between 6 and 8 months in. We've probably done 40 dinners with Steve and Jen. They've connected with Matt and Marin. There's lots of good social, they know our people. We know their people. Steve's invited me to do his poker nights with his buddies. I mean, I'm with his friends. And finally, Jen's wife in the middle of that street goes, hey, I got a question. She goes, how do you forgive God? Okay, all that time. And I said, that's a great question. I'm not sure. Did something happen? And she starts to cry. And I said, do you want to talk about it now? And she's, no, not now. I said, that's cool. Let me work on your question. And then we just kept throwing the ball. It was a couple more months later, she finally told me why. 4 days before her and Steve get married, her dad's truck rolls over and he dies. So she never got Dad to hand her off. Context. Okay, I can't deliver the gospel to Jen unless I know that. Steve, I found out later, stopped going to their Catholic church because they never let him take communion. So she would take communion. He's trying to find God. He can't take communion. They put ashes of sin on him once a year. They'll do that to you. But they won't let him take communion. So I got a little context on Steve. And eventually Steve and Jen, out in the middle of the street again, said, what were all those cars at your house the other night? And we said, well, that's Matt and Marin, and that's Rich and Laura. And about every 2 weeks we get together and we talk about life and God. And she said, is that like open? Could like we come to that? Okay. Engaging culture. A few of these people starting to come to faith. Starbucks, where Matt and I would drink coffee every day. They finally, after 6 to 8 months, they know we have something to do with God. They call us Frickin' Frack, or the missionary boys, the Rev, okay? And they would fire questions at us. And there was enough questions, we said, why don't you guys come over and we'll just talk about it. So we threw a dinner on a Saturday night and the entire Starbucks store came over. And so we just started to engage, and some of those people, we have those little Steve and Jen moments where are you picking up something different about this type of conversion process? What do you notice right now in my story? What am I not doing?
Making them a project.
Yeah, I'm not making them a project.
You're letting them come to you.
Yeah, that's the key part.
You're not ramming it down their throat.
Yeah, this is the key. When you watch the early church of Jesus, does Jesus look like a rabid evangelist?
No.
Not at all. He's just walking. And crowds are following. And what he does do is where sometimes he'll turn around and go, blah. And they'll leave. So he apparently isn't freaking out trying to save people. In fact, there's 6 times where Jesus grants salvation, and none of them are asking to be saved. That's extra credit. You go figure that one out, okay? Early church, what were they taught to be ready to do? Be ready at all times to be able to give an account. So why was that their evangelistic training? So they knew that if you live like a missionary and you're starting to represent and explain, express, invite people into a kingdom type of way of life, they will eventually, in the middle of the street, go, I got a question. Yeah.
Would you say it was part of your natural conversation, like kingdom concepts with each group that you were involved with, and that's how you became that's how you established that you are somewhat of an authority on God-like things?
Yeah, we would, in fact, the very first thing we ever did, we actually took those Starbucks people through Divine Conspiracy, where Dallas Willard's talking about the kingdom. I was trying to restart my own Christianity. So I'm trying to figure out the kingdom. So I invite them into my spiritual formation. And so I'm not teaching them the stuff I used to teach them. Okay, now second phase, if that's working, let's go back. We're a missionary team. We're back at the coffee shop. And let's say every one of us has befriended 3 people. There's that level of depth and interaction. Okay, we've given that much consistent time to them. What are we now going to be wondering about? So if I said before, what are we going to do now? You guys all said, we got to go engage the culture incarnationally, street cred, right? Become friends. That's happened. What are we now wondering about now? Do we start talking, how do we get them to church? Why not? You don't have one, technically. Now, theologically, you are one. We know that, and you have to accept that. You are, when Matt and I and our wives showed up in that neighborhood in Denver, we were church. Okay? But we're probably not inviting anybody to church because there's no form of church at that level. There's no worship service. There's no teaching. So we're going to go into the second missionary kind of phase, and that's the formation of incarnational community. And so in the book, what we do is we take that structure of attractional church, and we just roll it over on its side. We kind of tip it over. And instead of there being a few pastors and some staff and then a congregation that primarily come into the church and learn doctrine and create really hard black and white lines that keep the culture completely uninterested trying to break into that, we tip that triangle over and we open up the back end and we create not all these tiers of sort of intensity. We create 2 spheres of people, okay? So we create a sphere that we call missional people. We create a place of belonging for what we call sojourners. Okay, now sojourners, you'll notice there's kind of a solid line around missional people because those missional people are going to live an intentional way of life. Okay, so this whole conference is on missional community. I'll talk a little bit, 15 minutes tomorrow, on how to start incarnational community. That's all this is how do you create essentially an environment. Okay, it's an environment where the kingdom DNA can actually be shown the best way. So if I challenge that type of church can't really deliver the gospel anymore, we need a structure that can deliver the gospel of the what? Okay, so remember, gospel is not this abstract concept. It's to Jesus, it was always the gospel of the kingdom. Okay, so you need an environment where you can begin to deliver that. So we create this environment where you've got missional people that hold themselves to an accountable lifestyle. So Matt, Marin, Cheryl, and I, a few others, we will open up our house 3 nights a week. Okay, whenever Matt and I were going golfing, we will always try to invite a sojourner with us. When we go work out at the club, we'll always try. There were intentionalities Some people would say rhythms. If you join any sort of what we call a second decision community, a monastic community, there's always sort of, look, these are the ways that we live, right? That was early church communities, right? It says that everybody held them in high respect, but some were afraid to join because you knew if you join those people, they're not goofing around. This is not small group. Yeah. Are you just laughing or was that a question, Kim? Oh, you like that point? What did I say? Okay. No. I'm going to say that tomorrow. Okay? So we did that. Intentionality, I'll tell you what those people do in a minute that I think help kind of express the gospel. But you'll notice that sojourners don't have a solid line around them. Sojourners is an Old Testament concept that means temporary traveler. We believe every person is trying to travel, find God. Ecclesiastes says God's put eternity in the hearts of every person, right? They're all trying to find, we're built with that innate desire to find our Creator. So they're traveling. But it's a dotted line. They can come and go as they like. Steve and Jen, there's no pressure. We're not trying to, like, you can be with us if you believe what we believe. We create a place of belonging where saints and sojourners hang together, and they're friends. And the goal of that, the belief theologically, is that sojourners should be picking up on the lifestyle, the words, the posture, everything related to the life of those people. Okay? So if people are not coming to Christ, I would assert that we are not actually giving them the gospel, because the gospel is always the good news of the kingdom. So if your friends are not coming to Christ, they have not yet seen a big enough picture of good news to actually move. They might be tracking with you. Many of you actually, when you just describe your friends, you actually have sojourners. There are people that are kind of watching. They know you're a God person, but remember, they've got all those barriers that they're trying to figure out. I've had people say, I'm totally into this Jesus thing, but I'm not ready to be a Democrat yet. That was when we did the African American church in Portland. So to be a Christian, you're a Democrat. I've done that in now Denver, and people say, I don't want to be a Republican. Okay, so it's all these different things. So you are essentially, you've got to help these people continue to want to just move towards the life of these people, because if they move towards the life of these people, they will want to know about the God of those people. Does that make sense? Yeah.
To what extent do you engage the intellect of a sojourner? Like you're sort of like your typical postmodern person.
Well, it happens all the time. You're engaging everything about them, but you're engaging differently. We're not initiating apologetics to them. But if that's how they're processing, they will ask you apologetic type of questions, and then you deal with that. Many other people, if they're postmodern, they're not going to initiate apologetic type stuff. They're going to initiate feeling. They're going to bring up Pat Robertson. Why in the HELL did he say that? That's what a postmodern is going to bring to you. Okay, so but what you do is you're just sort of, here's what you're doing. A missionary team is initiating something towards the culture. And you're going to hope that if you initiate that stuff well, the culture is going to initiate back. So here's what you're initiating, okay? This essentially is what we would call the DNA of the kingdom for us. By the way, this is not the DNA of the kingdom, okay? This is Matt and I trying to look at all the things that when Jesus talked about the kingdom, we're trying to put them in coachable circles for us. So don't think this is, oh look, Hugh just figured out the DNA of the kingdom, okay? But this helps us to kind of keep each other on track. So we think the DNA of the kingdom is represented in mission, inclusive community, I don't even know how to spell that, and communion. Okay? And let me show you what I mean. So I'd say a missionary team is there to initiate mission, community, and communion. And the assertion of the book is that if you get any of your friends, any group of people that will learn to integrate these, in the middle of that, the kingdom will become tangible. That's why we call the book The Tangible Kingdom. Creating incarnational community, the posture and practices of ancient church now. Okay? And if you will create an environment where the DNA of the kingdom swirls all around people's lives, we believe that will be good news, and they will just start to move towards you in your community. Does that make some sense? So let me draw out really quick Brandon's going to leave here in a minute. I want Brandon to share. Mission in our concept represents what James would call pure religion, where he says, you want to boil this whole thing down, tired of all your gatherings, whatever. You want to really know what I'm on about? What's he say? Look after orphans. It's that benevolent action. It's what we would call blessing. Okay, so what do these people, what do you know, in Denver, Hugh, what do you ask your communities to do? We ask them to initiate blessing. And that's the original missional call to Abraham. With the blessing that I'm going to give you, you will now, through you, all the world will be what? Blessed, which meant the tangible touch of God coming into people's lives. So if you said to an Old Testament Jewish person, God's blessing be upon you, what do they think you're praying on them? That you'll have food, that God will save you from this other country that's trying to attack you. You will be blessed. It will go well with you, right? The 10 Commandments, so that it will go well with you, okay? That's what blessing, you just help people, no strings attached. Some churches, Adullam, I'd say, really started because we were really focused on providing inclusive community, a place of belonging for people. Other churches start literally just because of this. Brandon's one of our Missio guys, started Austin New Church, and has really actually been a light to us even, to actually hear a church that just started purely out of mission. But what intrigued me, Brandon, about your story, why I think I was drawn to you, is it came out of kind of the same pain that I had, I remember. So I'm trying to process church. I remember you saying that God challenged you that you might not love kind of the least of these. And so, and I'll speed up your story. You basically just started to try to help people. And what he found was that people sort of want to help people. The most benevolent people I know have generally been people outside the church. Again, you know why that is. It's because God's put eternity, God's put this sense of destiny on everybody. They all want to have meaning. So everybody wants to help. So do you got like a story of, you know, sort of a conversion story that happened just through like blessing people? Yeah, come up here, just so I can see you.
Yeah, so we had an unfair advantage because God kind of just really confronted us with, me specifically, say us, I like to say us.
Don't lump me into that.
With the reality that I had really been in full-time ministry for a long time. And God said, okay, you don't know your neighbors, you don't love the poor, and you really don't know many lost people. I mean, you know them. I mean, where you're invited into that third place. And so he kind of stripped us away and just said, go serve the poor. And fast forward, what we learned is being mission-minded really taught us how to be missional. It's the same strategy in engaging need, whether it's physical need, whether it's spiritual, emotional need, same strategy. It's meeting that need, it's getting there. And we just really believe you can't engage culture without engaging the needs of culture, right? And so God said, go serve the poor. There was this dream that maybe the church would be a part of this, but there was also this wonder if we had to leave the church to do it. So we started serving the poor. We're in Austin, okay? And for those of you, how many of you are from Austin? I mean, you live in the Austin area, okay? You know there's more nonprofits in Austin than any city in North America? One of the things that we really found is that the nonprofit is many times the church of the gay and lesbian community. It's many times the church of the atheist community, because they can go and they can do the things they know that is valuable, okay, where they know that they're accepted. And so we just began to engage the need in community, and we looked up, and all these people who were far from faith were serving with us. So we started to gather around that, created structure for that. Did you talk about missional flow? Oh, you almost got to form.
I don't want to tell them about that one, but
Okay. You want me to?
no, go ahead.
Okay. So we engage culture through meeting the needs of culture. God, it was a moral imperative for us just to serve the poor because that's what we had neglected so much. It's what I had neglected in my own life, okay? And so we started doing that, and then we said, uh-oh, we got a church. It's starting to emerge. What a beautiful thing. How do we not mess this up? So then we formed community. We created Incarnation communities where we said, how do we equip people to go do this? We tell people to go to this, but how do we equip people? How do we set people up? So we made sure that we formed structure, use a different term, created structure that supported that. So like in all of our community groups, we give away as much time as we keep for ourselves. We love our neighbors, serve our city as much time as we meet for Bible study and prayer and fellowship, okay? And so we built that into the structure, and what we do is Love your neighbor is live on mission in your community, in your neighborhood, invite someone over for dinner and don't invite them to church. Just ask them more about their life than they ask you about yours. Really find out what's going on. In your neighborhoods, create that structure, and then together on mission, we're serving some of our city partners, whether it's Lance Armstrong Foundation, Capital Area Food Bank. We really pick non-faith-based nonprofits to serve with.
Yep.
What if these leaders come to faith
Yep.
because they find out God cares about their the things they care about? But I think the key is, in Austin, I think it's biblical, but in Austin, I really believe the redemptive gift of this city is mercy. I believe in order to reach the city, we've got to love the city. We've got to serve the city. And something empowering happens. We're going to talk about discipleship and all that through Incarnation community as well. But here's what happens. For example, story you asked. One of our, we call them restore communities, focus on the individual, collective, and social renewal of our city. It's not small groups. There's a mission that we're gathering for. One of the things that they do, each restore community adopts some kind of nonprofit. They work with care communities. Care communities is an organization that partners with families who have a loved one who is dying from either AIDS or cancer. I mean, at the end, okay? And so I can think of this one restore community. They began to serve this family. Both the mom and the dad in their early 30s have AIDS. They have 2 children, 3 and 2. All right, so this community just loved on them, and they took turns. Every week they'd go over and they'd throw birthday parties for the kids. They would take them grocery shopping. They would do things around the house that he could no longer do. All these kinds of things, and they just invested in their lives. And we don't go in and say, "Hey, we're Austin New Church." Instead, we come in and we say we represent care communities because we want to serve them. They're already doing a great job. We want to serve them. About 4 months into the deal, the guy looks at the leader of that restore community and says, "Hey, you guys are part of a church, aren't you?" And he's like, "Yeah, we are." And he goes, "Can I come to your church?" And he goes, "Yeah."
See, it happens. Start crying up here.
Yeah, and so I didn't even know this was going on. I just knew we were structured for community to serve in that kind of a way and just engaging need in that kind of a way. And I remember I was sitting out in front. We had begun to gather at that point. We had grown enough. We were beginning to have this gathering point as we would send people out. And I remember standing on the front steps of where we gathered, and I was praying. I had just read a blog. A guy had just pretty much connected, probably out of his own guilt, connected social gospel with anybody who helps the poor, saying you don't really care about people coming to faith. And I was like, "God, you know my heart. You know I want them to experience the kingdom. You know can we see some fruit?" This was really early on. Can you just show me in profound ways? And as I was praying, I opened my eyes, and this couple came up. They looked homeless. I didn't know who they were, and it was them. And they walked by me, and that day both of them came to faith. 3 weeks later, Glenn, the husband, died. And she had no one but that restore community to wrap around her, do her funeral, love on her, help her in the transition. I mean, that's the church, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've had, I know, it's really hard to track now, but I know that over 80 of our first 120 adults came to faith through relationship and service evangelism. Directly. Just directly. And it's because we enable our people to do that. Now, my community group right now, in this, I said, after living on mission with them, and literally the one that I'm in, there's 14 people, 10 of them have not been in church, if at all, for 15 years. They're just done with it. And I said, "Hey, over the last year, at one point or another, you've asked me about spiritual things. Do you want to get together with our families and just have spiritual conversations, maybe once a month, and get our kids together? Let's serve. Let's go do something meaningful together." They were all over
I
it.
always will say yes
Yeah.
when that is there.
Yeah. So anyways,
Is this making some sense? Guys, this is the power of blessing. Everybody wants to get blessed. Look, evangelical church, remember the prayer Jabez? Holy crap, how we marketed this idea that Christians want to be blessed. Do you not think that the whole world wants to be blessed? Amen. Then God said, "I want to bless you. Let's start with Abraham. You guys, move your little community, leave your mom and dad's house, leave the church," essentially is what he was saying. I'm going to take you to a new land, and I'm going to bless you guys. I'm going to give you my life, and through you, all the world will be blessed. So you've got to have something. St. Patty's Day, our first year in Denver. We've now got more than 50 friends. Okay, it went better than we thought. We throw a St. Patty's Day party in fine Irish tradition. Okay, authentic St. Patty's Day party. And we had well over that 75 people jammed in our house. At the end of the evening, after we've just all done St. Patty's Day stuff, I pulled everybody together, jammed in our living room. I handed out a bunch of Celtic blessings. Some of them were prayers, some of them were scripture, some of them were funny little Irish sayings. But I said, I taught them about St. Patrick. And I said, there's something unique to Irish culture is this blessing. And I told them it's blessing. It's a powerful idea. I told them Jewish blessings are powerful because you're praying that God's life will be upon people. And I'd say in that room of about 80 people, about 15 of us are Christians. And you can see as I start to talk about God's desire to bless, you can just, stuff's happening. They go around and start reading, and we laugh when it's a funny one. Somebody would read a scripture of blessing. Somebody would read a saying that was deep. There's actually moist eyes. And then as we're leaving, a couple of the couples said, like, are you guys going to do anything like kind of, you do that Easter stuff, right? Well, we weren't planning anything, but we realized Easter, oh crap, Easter's next week. Okay? So we rented out a sort of a Terrace Gardens event center, and we had about 125 friends come, and we did an Easter gathering for them, and we did food, and we taught them the Easter story. This is what it's about. Okay? So blessing led to that. Okay? Blessing started Brandon's church. Okay? That's got to be a part of that. Now, Adullam really started more through this other circle, this kind of inclusive community idea. And this is just kind of a wild idea for you. If you ask anybody right now in Austin or anywhere in the world, are Christians inclusive or exclusive, what are you going to get? Okay? Doesn't that kill you? Okay? Well, you got to understand this. The very first faith communities were your first inclusive communities. Up to that point, you have massive segregation between people in the Jewish realm, sectarian, remember the inner-outer court? Massive segregation between people, even between Jewish people. Outside of the Jewish faith, you had almost like a caste system between different religions. Everybody was separated. Men and women didn't hang out together. Kids didn't get to be in the same room eating dinner with their parents. Samaritans, you guys know the story. And when Jesus comes on the scene, he starts to now move people together, right? Okay, night of the Sabbath, when all the Jewish families, it's like my big fat Greek wedding, everybody would have had to go to their house, get the goat, start preparing everything. Jesus grabs the disciples off the Sea of Tiberias, where they were fishing with all the normal blokes, all the normal guys. So you got these kind of Jewish outcasts, never made it through the rabbinical school, so they're now fishermen. Probably their best friends are these non-Jewish guys, because they're out there every day, okay? That just happens. Night of the Sabbath, they would have all got off their boats, went back to mom's house, started to prepare the Passover, and that's when Jesus grabs them and says, look, okay, not tonight, we're going to go, and he goes to Levi's house. And then we have the story of Levi, okay? He starts to teach his disciples, okay, this is who I hang with. When he takes the long cut into Samaria. And then he knows the boys are going to be coming up the road, so we're going to be talking to this little Samaritan woman here. That's going to jack up the guys. And then he teaches them, okay? Early faith communities. They said that they were first called Christians where? In Antioch. First called Christians. Read the story right prior to that statement. That was a story of very diverse people all of a sudden being pushed into the same community. That's why it's not small group. It's not affinity-based small group. Jesus' communities were the first safe place anybody could go. And so you've got to create an environment. This thing, is that going to feel safe? That won't feel inclusive. So that's why you got to create an environment where Saint and Sojourner can be. That's why these people they can sin their heads off. They can have any wacky theology. And we don't care. We're not worried about their sin. It's not an issue. Jesus didn't seem to be all that worried about sin. He knew he was about to die for it and render it, what? He says he died once in Hebrews, once and for all. Sin was managed by Jesus. Because he managed it, you don't have to freak out about it. You need to really take it seriously in your own life. But these people are just doing naturally what you're supposed to do when you're not. Okay, so Jesus finds people all the time. He's a friend of these sinners. He's not afraid to be in places where sinners go. He's not afraid to be around them while they're sinning because he knows deep down, I handled the sin. We don't need to worry about their behavior. We don't lead out with behavior modification. We lead out by capturing their heart. And that's where incarnation comes in. Incarnation starts to capture the heart. Does that make some sense? So we just created lots of these little communities where we would just do tons of stuff to help them. We would provide places every Saturday night. All the Starbuckers would come over, and we would talk about life and God. And then they're coming over on Mondays and Tuesdays and Thursdays, and all these different types of safe places where they know that they're in community relationship with us. Okay? Third circle, communion. This would be those things that we would normally talk about in this context. So what are those things? Communion means those things that help us connect with God. What are those things that we do to connect with God? Yeah, so scripture, prayer. What did we do last night? Worship, okay. So all those things, so devotions, maybe in that sense, okay. I'd say most evangelicals think that's pretty much the essence of the game. Okay, so that's what we try to get people to come do with us. When you watch Jesus do communion, connecting with the Father, where is he in most of those cases? It's kind of along the way, right? And what's unique about sort of Christians that create places of communion where even sojourners can actually partake in spiritual type of things? It's a fairly powerful deal. And the key to that, though, is that you still have to feel like you're being converted too. I mean, when I look at Hugh Halter, I looked at him in the mirror today to see if he would look okay to stand in front of you today. I kind of checked him out. There's still a lot of Hugh Halter that I look at that is not conformed to the image of Jesus. There's a lot of it there. Anybody look at that type of stuff? Okay. So I can easily, if I feel like I'm still in the conversion process, guess who that makes it safe to join in with? Anyone, right? So when you are still on now this type of church, it doesn't seem to communicate that. It kind of says everybody in here is converted. Now theologically, there is a point to that, right? And I believe in a theological moment of conversion. It says our names are written down in the Lamb's Book of Life. We've crossed from life to death, right? So there is that moment. But we don't seem to be able to, scripturally, be able to necessarily determine when that is for somebody. We really don't. We think that might be when they pray a prayer. And for many people, I think that is the moment. But if we think, okay, we're converted, and the culture is not converted, then what is our posture towards that culture? It communicates that we're trying to give you something we already got. And that creates one of those barriers. But if they see you saying every couple of weeks we just get together and we talk about life and God, trying to figure out this whole kingdom thing, and they see that Hugh Halter's authentically not totally figured it out, even though I might at a salvation level have that level of conversion, I'm still along a continuum. And so anybody can be with me. Many people have asked, well, when you do all this inclusive community, you're hanging out with all these lost people, like, how do you grow deep with God when you got all these pagans hanging around? I mean, it comes up all the time. We had a staff team ask us this of a megachurch. Don't we need kind of our own little times? And so with this pretty large church, we divided a room of about 300 people. And we said, okay, your side of the room, you guys are pagans. Brainstorm everything that you think pagans struggle with. And you guys, you'll all be Christians on this side, okay? You write down what Christians struggle with. We gave them about a half hour. We came back. You know the deal. It's exactly the same. Pornography. Why do I exist? Why do I exist? How do I connect with God? How do I connect with God? How do I parent my kids? How do I parent my kids? You're no different. Even though there's been a change of heart that Jesus did for you, you are no different than your friends. And they're no different than you. And if you will continue to be converted into the ways of the kingdom, your friends will feel safe to come along that journey with you. Is that okay? I'm gonna take questions in just a second. I want to wrap up because we've just got a few minutes. Missionary flow that postures you incarnationally in the right way to deliver the gospel in an environment where you can actually live out into the culture the DNA of the kingdom. People will always be drawn to the good news of the kingdom, and you allow this to happen. Like Brandon's story, we've had a very high percentage of people, especially in the first 2 years, that were conversion stories. And I have not led one of them to the Lord yet. And that was what they used to call me the close the deal guy. I had businessmen that hired me to go downtown and just lead dudes to the Lord. Okay? I have not personally been able to close the deal now for about 9 years, and yet we've seen a lot of conversion. So I'm learning in this story, as I think Jesus understood, the Holy Spirit is the one that convicts the world of sin and righteousness. God's people are the ones that are to help sort of dig out a trough in the dirt that lets the kingdom's water kind of flow, and you're going for the kingdom too, right? You're trying to dig it out for yourself, trying to figure out, and as you do, and as your friends do that together, you create a very safe place of belonging. Your friends will come to God. But you got to think like a missionary. Give it some time. Okay, your friends aren't going to go to hell because you don't get to them in time. God's a lot smarter than that. Okay, He knows what He's doing. Now, questions in just a couple minutes. Yeah.
Especially in the context of starting a church this way. One of the things in Acts that's there a lot too is apostolic accountability. When you're going through this flow, who are you accountable to?
Well, you're accountable to yourself, and the accountability is really crucial, because if you're going to dive deep into culture, you don't want to do a lot of that by yourself. So there's safety, especially in being in places where maybe we wouldn't have normally have been. You have accountability together. So in Adullam, we watch each other. We're not going to. We know the witness is so important. We're not going to blow the witness. So there's deep account. I think personal evangelism is very dangerous. Friendship evangelism, I think, is also potentially dangerous, because you can be really friendly for a week, but if they see you flipping off the guy on the freeway, you've just blown. The one person isn't going to get it done. If your community is together, you will be safe. There'll be accountability even over teaching, the whole deal. The next session that we'll do, if you guys want to keep tracking, we're going to actually help you deal with essentially the evangelical dilemma, because this is a missionary flow of how we engage the culture, conversion from scratch. Most of you are in environments where there already is a structural congregation there. And you're trying to figure out, how do I get to where I can engage the culture again? We're just going to walk you backwards, but everything centers around this idea of coaching people into incarnational community. So we're going to actually walk you through a thing called the TK Primer. I think it's a 3 o'clock session. But if you were to go on mission and find friends to do this, you will actually have to retrain everybody. You'll have to retrain yourself in how do you begin to articulate those 3 circles, integrate them together.